Chris and his lieutenants waited patiently for the rear of the horde, while several adults ransacked Royalwood's middle school. They didn't find anything, but Chris could sense that they were just getting there. They couldn't have gone far, he said coldly. No matter where they weren't safe, Chris and his army would hunt them down to the ends of the earth. By the time the horde was done searching, it was through a tornado that they passed through the school, and a horde of them torn apart. It wouldn't be safe to live in anymore. Hell, no, where it was safe as long as Chris and his army were on the move. Then he ordered his army to march on, and they followed his orders faithfully, continuing to leave any car, building, structure that got in their way in the state of a total ruin. Meanwhile, at the other end of Royal Woods, the princess and her loyal subjects were wide awake on the prowl. They searched high and low of every building they passed. No prey had been spotted yet, but they were close. She could feel it. She could find and devour them all, and at the end of the day, she got what she wanted, just like she always did. A few minutes before, at one end, several yards away from the elementary school, Jacob sat on the roof of his house. He climbed up and scanned the horizon. Each time he caught movement in the corner of his eye, his heart felt like it was going to explode. He gripped on the flare gun, was holding to dear life, praying that he wouldn't need to use it. Several hundred yards away from him in the other end of the school, a boy named Jim and a few others were on high alert. And Wild kept asking himself to all the kids at the elementary school, would they really be able to fend off over the 2,000 adults? After all, they seemed to be less than 200 kids, some of which were way too young to fight. He tried to do the math in his head. Less than 200 kids were going against well over thousands of adults. He didn't know what to precise the numbers, but the way he saw it, each kid would have to kill about 10 or more adults for them to stand a chance. Hopefully the guns would give him an advantage. Meanwhile, Jacob was getting restless. The waiting of not knowing worse than anything, when they were going to show up. How many would they exactly be? He wiped the sweat off his forehead and exhaled forcefully. It took a few seconds to let out all the air that stored up. The sound of exhaling was getting quieter, and he was done exhaling from the expected sound to stop as well. But it didn't. They just still sounded lingering in the air. At first it sounded like it would have been just the wind, but after a few seconds, it reminded him weak of the ocean waves. It reminded him of the sounds of the crowds from the football field where he and his family would go to watch the Royal Woods Roosters play. Suddenly he began to see something happening in the distance in the single dark mass. It reminded him of rising flood water, engulfing anything that got in his way. He swore and called it down to his friends that he had come to him with a confirm of what he was seeing. They hurried up and Jacob pointed towards the distance. His friends began to tremble when they saw it. "That's way more than 1,000, one of them said. "Fire that flare!" the other one shouted. Jacob raised his flare gun and squeezed the trigger. Jim was still looking out in the distance, still wondering if he and the other kids would be able to fight when he heard that at first, when he thought it was the wind, when soon realized it was a torment of moans and hisses. He then turned towards the sound and he saw, well over 1,000 of adults storming towards them. Before they could say anything, one of his friends spoke. "Oh shit," he said. "I know, I see them too," Jim said, still looking at the approaching mass. "Them?" his friends questioned. "Yeah, them. What do you think Jim paused when he saw his friend originally swore. Several yards away, then the other end of the school, a flare shot up into the sky, meaning that Jacob had probably spotted another group of grown-ups as well. Now it was Jim who swore. "I guess this is it, I guess," he said as he raised his flare gun and fired. Still a few minutes before, Brock stood at the roof of the school. Next to him was Aubrey. Her face showed no emotion than his. She looked scared. He looked determined. That's what she loved about him. He was fearless and a leader. Even though he was only 15, he managed to take control of the situation and help save many kids at the middle school when it first began. He really wanted to reach out and grab his hand, but right now was not the time for any mushy crap. They had a job at hand, a big one. If they managed to come out alive, there would be plenty of time for her to get sappy later. Right now, she needed to focus on staying alive. "Look!" a kid shouted, pointing at the sky that was quickly illuminated from the rising sun. They could all see a flare soaring into the sky with one round. Then another kid shouted and pointed at the other end. Another flare. "What does that mean?" a kid asked, even though he already knew the answer. "Isn't it obvious?" Brock asked. "Both hordes are arriving at the same time." "Just our luck," another kid spoke. Brock turned to the other kids and told them to go to the gym and warned the others. The kid nodded and went back into the school, as Brock turned to address some of the other kids. The other kids were downstairs. He was running in the hallway, passing several classrooms. He was already sweating by the time he reached the gym. He flung open the doors. "They're here!" he shouted. Lincoln's entire body tensed up when he felt his sisters begin to raise their heads around him. The kids shouted again, and several kids groaned in perpetration. Nevertheless, they began to stand up. They knew it was to do this or die time. The kids began to shout out orders. They set up the plan from last night. Anyone 13 and older would grab a weapon and meet by the foyer of the school, while the younger kids would have to hide in the largest custodial closet the school had. Lincoln hurried over to his younger sisters. He picked up Lily and looked at his sisters. Lana and Lola were huddled against Luna, refusing to leave her side. Next to Luna was Luann, who also had a terrified expression on her face. With another girl behind her like a cast of a shadow, Lincoln knew her name was Maggie, and apparently she liked Luann. Who could have guessed? Lucy stood still, hugging herself tightly. Lynn, who had just had a bat prepped up against her shoulder, put a hand on her younger sister in an attempt to comfort her. It did little to ease Lucy's nerves. "Lincoln," Luna stated, "take the others to the closet." Lincoln nodded and turned to Clyde, who was standing right beside him as he always was. He was such a good friend. "Can you give me a hand, buddy?" he asked. "Sure thing, pal," Clyde said. Lincoln handed Lily to Lucy as he and his friend tried to pry the twins away from their living oldest sister. Once they began, Lola began to cry, "Please don't leave us!" Tears were streaming down her face. It broke Lincoln's heart. It reminded her of how terrified she was at the beginning. Luna knelt. "Don't worry, sis. I don't plan on leaving anytime soon. I plan to be here a long time. I plan on being here with all of you with me." She then turned to her sisters with a grin on her face. "I'll survive. You'll survive. We'll all survive." Lincoln looked around. Lana didn't look as upset as Lola, but she still looked scared. She had a determined look on her face. He then looked back at Luna and said, "See you later." They all embraced each other and then went their separate ways. Stan was fully awake now. He, Mary, and Speck had watched all the children hide in the closet, as well as Mary's younger brother, Matt. He didn't want Mary to leave, but she had to. Brock needed all hands on deck. They ran to the foyer, and Stan saw the older, loud siblings waiting their turns to give in guns. He gripped the mace tightly in one hand, but quickly looked away from them and grabbed onto Mary's hand. He looked in her eyes as she gave him a wary yet hopeful smile. In the auditorium, Duke began to rock back and forth more frightfully now. He was on the verge of tears. "Come on, man, what are you doing?" Joey asked. "I can't do it, Joseph," Duke cried. "I'm too scared." "What the heck are you talking about?" Joey demanded. "What do you think? I'm scared. I don't want to go out there. I don't want to die." "Neither do I, but I'm still going out there to fight for my life and everyone else's." Joey was starting to lose his patience. "Now come on." "No, I can't. I'm sorry." Duke lowered his head and turned away, as to imply this conversation was over. Joey swore and ran out of the auditorium. Duke looked back at the doors closed. He was surrounded by dim light that was being cast by the candles. The flickering small flames danced around the shadows' walls. Duke was afraid that at any moment one of the shadows could morph into an adult and attack him. A minute later, the door swung open and Duke jumped. Joey was now running back to him. "I knew you wouldn't leave me," Duke said tearfully. Joey then threw something at Duke, let him hit in the square of his chest, and bounced off and hit the ground with a thud. It was a gun, a Glock to be exact. "Oh, is this to protect myself?" Duke asked as he picked up. "No," Joey said. "It's to kill yourself with." Duke snapped his head and looked at his friend. "What?" "You heard me. If you're too scared to fight, then you're as good as dead. So go ahead and use it on yourself. to spare you from any pain of being ripped apart. Joey turned and stormed out of the auditorium, axe in hand, leaving a shocked Duke by himself in his pretend throne. Brock was back in the foyer of the school. Grant and his younger siblings were all led up to him. Still tied up, Brock didn't decide to cut the ropes off of their hands. You probably wouldn't want me to shoot you, would you? He asked as Grant made sure that they were unbound. Probably not, Grant responded as he rubbed his wrists. Good enough for me. Brock watched some of the three, grabbed up the automatic rifle, then hurried out of the school doors. Stan was still with Mary waiting at the line when Speck tapped him on the shoulder. He looked back and Speck had whispered something to him. I've been thinking, Stan. I've decided to go on my little own mission. It's a long shot, but I think it might work. Stan raised an eyebrow. What are you talking about? I'm talking about putting an end to the army that I saw back in Huntington Oaks, once and for all. If I don't see you again, I just want you to know that even though I haven't known you for so long, you're a good friend. Stan didn't know what to say. Speck patted him on the shoulders and then ran down the foyer and out of the school. Stan called out for him, but he was gone. He would have run after him, but he didn't want to lose his spot in line. Plus, he chose to stay close to Mary. I hope you know what you're doing, Speck. Soon all the kids were out in the front of the school, weapons in hand. A lot of them had held guns before, and let alone fired at something. The morning sun was rising higher and higher in the east, as if it were to get a front row sweet seat to witness the battle that was about to take place. There were two rows facing different directions. One direction was at the army that Stan and Speck had spotted coming from, while the other was the princess and her army that was going to come from. Brock was next in the group where the Loud sisters and a lot of kids from the school were facing, while Ethan and his group from Indiana faced the direction where the princess would be coming from. The gun felt heavy in Luna's hands. She didn't know the gun she was holding was called, but she knew a lot of people called it an assault rifle, and it was used in the military. She had seen it in more movies than she could remember. Next stood Luann, holding a rifle that looked familiar, probably an AK-47. Next to Luann was Lynn holding a smaller gun. It was some kind of king of submachine gun. As soon as everyone was lined up, Brock stood on a parked car and began to address everyone. Sunlight was pouring down on the spotlight, revealing a firm, battle-ready face. This is it! His voice boomed through the morning air. This is the moment that I will decide for our futures. We must conquer. Our fears defeat these adults. Don't just do it for your own sake or mine, but do it for theirs as well. He pointed out towards the school, acknowledging all the kids still dwelled inside. The last thing standing between them and certain death, if we die, they die too. So this does hope for the future of the great town of Royal Woods. Luna thought of her younger siblings cowering inside, unsure whether her older siblings were going to make it out of this battle alive. She gripped the gun tight and looked at Gwen, said Luann and Lynn. There was no way any of them were going to die, not if she had anything to say about it. We have dreams. Dreams of hope, dreams of prosperity, dreams of wishes yet to come true. I refuse to let those things take them away. Does anyone have anything they want to accomplish when they wish they had done something before the blast? It was quiet for a few seconds. Everyone was too petrified to speak. Then a low, monotonous voice filled the silent void. I wish I told my mom that I loved her more often. Everyone looked towards the voice that had come from to see Maggie, standing with her shoulders slumped, the rifle she was holding to her side facing down. Her face was set in the emotionless, uncaring expression, but her eyes and voice felt betrayed her. My mom always tried her best to make me happy, but I never showed any kind of that appreciation or any emotion for that matter. I always put an uncaring front, but the truth was, I loved my mom. I really did. I just thought there would be time to tell her that I loved her and appreciate everything that she's ever done for me. Lone tears dripped down from the racing of her pale cheeks now. Luann put a hand on Maggie's shoulder and spoke up too. I really wanted to become the world-famous comedian. I want to make people laugh, to forget about how screwed up the world can be sometimes. The murmurs amongst the crowds and children. Then another voice came up this time. It was Lynn's. I wish I could complete my FLIBBR. There was a lot of confused faces throughout the crowd, but there was no time for Lynn to explain what that meant. What I mean is, I wanted to become the best athlete in the world. I've pushed myself to do better. Good enough was never good enough. When it came to the best of me I could be, I always wanted to be the best. I wanted to be number one. I wanted to be champion. But the thing is, what I did before probably isn't much worse anytime anymore. What matters most right now is the overcoming of our fears and the beating of this thing. Everyone continued at Lynn when Luna spoke up. I really wanted to become a famous musician before all this, she said. I wanted to create music. I wanted to travel around the world. I wanted to marry Mick Swagger. But most importantly, I wanted to make people feel the same way I felt when I listened to music. To make them feel like the same euphoria and joy. I always wanted to make people dance, bang their heads, and get excited. I was always the happiest when I was on stage. However, we're on this stage, and the question is, what will you be doing when the curtain rises? And what will you be doing when it falls, living or dying? I'll tell you what I'll be doing. I'll be living to play another day. There were even more excited murmurs amongst the crowd. Another kid spoke now, and it was Cooper. I wanted to be an athlete too, more especially a basketball player. I always looked up to basketball players. I always told myself that someday kids will look up to me too. But that's not going to happen if I don't make it through this, which is why I don't plan on dying on today either. He looked at Lynn as they both smiled after he said that. I wanted to be a race car driver, Ethan spoke now. I wanted to compete in the Indy 500. My home state's a pride of joy. I probably won't be able to do that now, but I would like to go back to Indianapolis someday. Only death itself wouldn't be able to stop me from doing that. I wanted to become a forest ranger, Tom said. I wanted to teach people the outdoors like my dad did, and with me, when I wanted to visit Yellowstone National Park. But the only problem is it's been probably thousands of miles away, so I won't be able to go there anytime soon. But that doesn't mean I can't dream of it. I wanted to make movies, Shade said. Nothing too serious, just a bunch of movies that buddies can watch and get high to, like B-movie type stuff. I wish I would have watched more movies, Randy's who said this. Several kids began to laugh. I'm serious, he pressed. I wish my dad would have accepted me for who I am. Joey spoke now as several kids looked to him. He held his axe firmly. He never said anything positive about it. He always puts me down, tells me I was worthless and useless. I don't plan on being useless today. Today I'm going to show the world what I'm capable of, and that we can all start a new world. A world without hate and prejudice. It was just all where we can get along. I intended to see that world shape up no matter what. Several kids began to say what they planned on doing before the world went into shit, and they planned on doing if they ever got out of this. Simple things like getting a pet or buying a car, telling their crush they really like them. More important things like getting a job, traveling to a faraway place, starting a family. Mary led towards Stan. Any dreams? Staying alive, he told her, and maybe kissing you, he thought to himself. Brock then spoke up again. Great, keep those thoughts in mind while fighting. Fight for your lives, fight for who you love, and the lives of every kid who has fallen into these monsters. Believe me and yourself and the person standing right next to you. Fight like hell. The crowd of kids roared to life. The sound of their cheering was quickly replaced by thousands of approaching greens. Everyone took aim. The sounds of the approaching adults reminded the Loud Sisters of one time there was a tornado warning. The storm loomed over the house, creating an unlike anything else was ever said. As the sound grew louder and the new goal came to their minds, someday they would return to their home. The first line of greens began to emerge from the horizon. Both hordes began to appear at the exact same time. Several kids began to groan, swore, and shiver. They all kept hoping that at any moment the last of the greens would appear, but they just kept coming. One kid began to shake his head and started to back away, but Joey was right behind him. What's the matter? You don't plan on living forever, do you? The kid rapidly shook his head. Good, Joey told him, because no one lives forever. Even if you live today, you'll just end up dying eventually. Everyone does. He then turned to address the crowd. Listen up, everyone. You could die fighting. You could die standing. Die even lying down. But nobody is going to die running. He had marched the kid back of the line, gripped his axe tightly. He didn't need a gun. I won't back down, Luna said, repeating it to herself, as the army grew closer. The sight of the approaching mass causing Luann to utter only words she could think of. Shit, piss, fuck, other kind of words that she heard. Lynn was awestruck of the crowd. She suddenly remembered that she was so focused on the approaching horde that she had forgotten about her silly, little superstitious rituals she always did before a sporting event. None of that mattered. They didn't need luck to beat the army. They needed a miracle. Hail Mary, she said to herself. Meanwhile, at one end of the line, a quote popped into Shade Walker's head as he began to say it out loud. We're gonna need a bigger boat. He looked around the other kids, hoping they acknowledged the clever use of that line, but was met with blank stares. He realized his mistake. Sorry, what I meant to say was, you're going to need a bigger boat. We wouldn't make more sense if we were in a boat, one kid finally pointed out. Shade shrugged his shoulders. Come on now. I've been waiting for a chance to say that line my entire life. Don't ruin this moment for me. A lot of kids shook their heads and just went back to aiming their guns. As more greens appeared, they were more nervous the kids got. They wanted to hurry up and start shooting, but Brock ordered everyone not to shoot until he said so. At the line of the kids, Ethan waited for Brock's signal before the Princess Army marched closer. He was wielding an AR-15 and scanning the crowd for the princess. She must have been at the very back of the horde like the brat she was, making the adults do her dirty work. She was going to make sure that today was her last day on Earth. Hold, Brock told everyone, his hand raised. The sound of Green's shuffling, raspy breaths became unbearable. I love you all so much, one kid said around them. Hold, the stench of the Greens was appalling. It looks like I picked a bad day for smoking, another kid said. Remember, no Russian, Shade said to himself, as he looked at the mass of the hordes of Greens, and the iron sight of the automatic rifle reminded him of his favorite Call of Duty mission. Fire! Brock yelled. Speck was surrounded by darkness. A flashlight only provided illumination underground labyrinth as the sewers beneath the streets of Royal Woods. He had walked in the direction that would most likely lead to the back of the horde as he and Stan spotted. He could hear the marching army above as well. He can hear them through the occasional storm drain, and the dark mass of bodies prevented the sunlight from shining through the gaps of the case and the shadows away. Speck was hurrying as fast as he could. He kept patting his jacket to secure sure his gun was tucked away safely. Other than that, he was the hammer that was so fond of, the knife and the flashlight that scanned through the darkness. The sound of scraping and shuffling feet resonated through the damp air and the street above. Speck was watched from his step. It would suck if he accidentally fell into the dirty sewer water that strode before the concrete away that was hurrying out. He also knew that there was a possibility that the adult could rise from the water and drag him to the depths like a hungry alligator. Stan knew that something told him that something had happened while a few other kids were wandering around the exact tunnels. Just focus on the main goal, he kept telling himself. Focusing on getting behind enemy lines and scooping out grown-ups or grown-ups that could be heard behind all this. That's how it worked, right? The grunt stood in front of the lines while the generals, or whatever, stood back from the firefights. He ordered the underlining around. If this hunch was correct to the end of the day, he would have had to deliver this fatal blow. Lana knew that she had to do something. She was such a shame about what she should have done. Several kids died because of her desire to kill Grease Monkey. But when she knew that she didn't do anything, everyone was going to die anyway. Presently she, Lincoln, Lucy, Lola, and Lily, and their dog Charles were hiding in the closet with several other kids, including Clyde, Penelope, Grace, and several other younger kids. She was holding a screwdriver in one hand, and she could unscrew the air vent in the wall that had plenty of bow and arrows that she'd stolen from Tom. She remembered they were leaving the gym when she heard Tom ask if there was someone with his bows and arrows, to which someone responded by saying, "Who needs a bow and arrow when we have guns and bullets?" She was planning on sneaking into the vent, crawling up to the roof to look for the Grease Monkey, so she could shoot him and put him down once and for all. But it was quiet. She needed something to distract her siblings. Lincoln held Lily, who was asleep, stirring in his arms. Everyone was so focused on the door to the closet, afraid that any moment would swing up and grown-ups and parents and teachers would storm in and kill them all. Lana apologized to Lily in her mind, and he pinched the baby sister without anyone noticing. Lily began to cry, which caused everyone to turn their attention to her and Lincoln. Several of the kids around Lincoln's age began to whisper harshly at him to shut Lily up. Some of the younger kids began to whimper. Lincoln tried desperately to shush Lily as he rocked her in his arms. He even tried to sing that Fenton the Feel Better Fox song, which earned him more instinctives from the small crowd. Now it was Lana's chance. She had already unscrewed screws and except one at the top of the corners. She was able to slide once when she slipped away without anyone noticing. If Grease Monkey was alive, then Lana was going to kill him herself. Everyone's ears were ringing harder than everyone had before, and they continued to pull triggers of their guns. They were surprised that the blood wasn't pouring out of their ear holes from the gun's smoke, filled everyone's nostrils, bodies in front of them. The Greens never stood a chance against a barrage of bullets. There may have been a lot, but there have been more bullets and bodies. At the back of the horde, Chris was staggered with the realization that the kids were heavily armed. What the fuck? They have guns? He looked at Crony, who just stood unfazed by the realization. They are only delayed the inevitable. They'll run out of ammo eventually. We will win this. We will slaughter them all. Chris swallowed and nodded. The kids, he knew what they were talking about. They would take a couple of guns, would take an army out this big. They were in for a rude awakening. Still, Chris decided to hang out at the back of his army, like he always did. Luna and his sisters ran out with ammo, just as the wave of Greens were defeated. There were no injuries, but there was no telling how long it would last, as she and everyone else reloaded their weapons with trembling hands. A magazine was currently in her gun, that was taped to another one. Brock said they were like that, so everyone could reload faster. A few remaining Greens had the first wave were still advancing towards the line of kids. A lot of them still had to beat them back on their butts with rifles. Luckily, the Greens were already in bad shape, so they were taken down easily. Luna's heart was beating faster than ever before. She looked over at her sisters, who were still reloading weapons as well. Lynn was having no trouble at all. Luann, however, was struggling. Luckily, she had Maggie, who was patiently helped her put in a fresh magazine. Behind them was Ethan, and with the group was still talking on to the princess group, who were like any other army of adults, was advancing to a single unit. There wasn't as many as the other army, though. However, this group was more determined. They were trying to prove to themselves to the princess. Luckily, they were still able to keep their subjects at bay. As the kids from Royal Woods continued to reload, many of them began to shout at the pile of dead Greens. How do you like that? Is that all you got? They're even uglier than they are dead. Their boastful attitudes were short-lived when the Greens approached. They looked stronger, healthier, and more agile. Not more of them, someone cried. You want more? Lynn shouted at the adults. Once more with the fleeing, Joey said. Everyone else aimed down at their sights again, bracing for the loud noise that undoubtedly echoed throughout the town of Royal Woods again. Luna took a deep breath. Remember what you're fighting for, she told herself. Fire! Brock shouted again. In the front row of Royal Woods Elementary School lit up again. Bodies continued to fall just like that, only this time the Greens filled the space with more fallen comrades were faster. They were filling the gap between the two groups, quicker than the kids were comfortable with. And at that moment their fear came true. An adult male reached out in front of the line, set his sights on the kid who just ran out of ammo. Oh God, oh God, oh God! The kid cried as he tried to swat the adult with the rifle. But the adult blocked the hit and bit down the kid's arm and knocked him down. The kids ran to next to him, but Joey had beat them to it, ending the Green's miserable life with one swing of the end of his pickaxe. He put the adult off of the kid, who was now crying, and he turned towards the kid standing next to him. Take him inside to Sanjay and get your asses back in here. The two boys nodded, and they did as they were told. Joey then turned back to the army. The second wave was spinning, but it was coming strong. Most of all, they were going to run out of ammo, which meant they would have to fight the next wave with their melee weapons. Not that it bothered him. He knew his way around with the axe. He wasn't so sure what the other kids' fare would be as well. as they had fought to save the other guns for the next stronger greens. Oh well, no doubt this battle would separate the survivors from the victims. Speck was almost positive that he was behind the massive horde now. All he needed to do was find a way out. He shone his light around the walls and the ceiling of the sewer to try to remain focused on the hinges that maybe he could use to climb up and escape from the underground web of human waste. He was too focused. However, he didn't notice the shape making its way towards him into the water until it was too late. Speck gasped as the hand grabbed his grimy fingers around his ankles. He swore at himself for being careless as he stomped on the wrist of the unseen figure hidden below the murky sewage. It let go and he stumbled backwards. He quickly regained his composure and tried to flee, but ended up running into the chest of another adult male who had been drawn to him by the commotion. Speck tried his best not to scream, and the adult clammed his grubby hands around his shoulders and opened his mouth. Speck panicked and shoved his head of this hammer away to the human man's mouth. He bit down hard and began to shake his head back and forth like a dog would do to his favorite toy. Speck had pulled as hard as he could and pried the hammer from the grown-up's mouth, as well as a few teeth. He was about to swing the hammer back at him before the adult came before him. By the time he was out of the water, lashed onto his arm, he tried to take a bite out of him, but Speck screamed and pulled as hard as he could. The adult wouldn't let go. He looked to be a bald male covered in muck and gunk and grime. He reminded Speck of Terminator from the Return of the Living Dead. Speck had dropped the flashlight and reached into his pocket coat for a knife, knowing he was going to take his gun out and waste any precious ammo on these assholes. He pulled out his switchblade knife and slashed at the tar man's wrist, cutting deeply, making it easier to pull away from him. He finally pulled away and swung the hammer, slamming it in front between the adult's eyes. He too stammered backwards, and Speck spun on his heels and delivered a lethal blow to the tar man's head. It was smashing a rotten pumpkin. Tar man's skull had no protection, but it was out like a light. Speck had shoved him as he fell backwards into the water with a heavy splash, and Speck spun again at the other direction of the adult, in the same spot again. Now he too was turned off forever. Speck shoved him into the water and watched for the briefest moment as the current carried the bodies to God knows where. He picked up the flashlight and dusted himself off. Nothing was going to stop him, not even more grown-ups. Speck swore as more greens began to emerge from the darkness, the direction he had just came from. He then turned around, praying that the adults would encounter not far from behind him, and hiding around the corner for the perfect moment to strike. The last of the ammo was spent as the few bodies fell. "Shit, I'm out!" someone cried. "Me too," another kid cried, as the others proclaimed that they were dry as well. Several kids groaned and moaned. "What are we gonna do?" "Don't lose hope," Brock said. "We're not finished yet. Only a few kids that were injured by the previous wave. Finn and his group were now out of ammo as well." "We'll have to use our melee weapons," Aubrey declared, as several kids rushed to the wagon that had brought all of their melee weapons. The three oldest Loud sisters chose their weapons. Luna chose her preferred weapon, an axe. Luann chose a spike club, and Lynn chose an iron club that was shaped like a baseball bat with spikes. The third wave would begin to approach at any second now. They all hoped that they would be on the final onslaught. There was no way it would be easier as they used guns. This was going to be up close and personal. "Ethan, how are you holding up?" Brock asked the boy in the Colts jersey. "Well, as I can be expected," he shouted back. Surprisingly, no one from this group was injured. The kids from Royal Woods were so focused on the larger whole, they had forgotten they were all about Ethan and his group. Luckily, there were enough kids. Princess's army was being cut down left and right, but without guns, the real challenge was close to a being. Silence was music to Chris's ears. The stupid kids had run out of their ammo for their stupid guns, and now he studied over, with cold hard faces, of what was left of the army. Still way over 100, plenty enough to do the job. Those kids were at his mercy, just like the other group that he attacked, and he was offered them no mercy at all. Just like the last month, he killed these kids, devoured them, then stormed to the school and devoured the kids who hid inside with the scared little brats they are. Not only that, Crony had told him that there was another large group of adults at the opposite side of the school, which had more adults to help him rebuild his army. Everything was coming up to Chris. He then looked at the strongest adults of the bunch. Besides him and Crony, the adults were with a sledgehammer, greased hair, wearing a mechanic uniform, was the one he always carried around for bricks. "What were they waiting for? Kill them all!" he shouted. The adults then howled and began to march towards the school, while Chris laughed manically, just like he did on the day the world became like this. Lana Loud was crawling as fast as she could, bow in hand, the same bow Tom used to kill Lori. Lana quickly shot through that in her mind, focused solely on him. She could feel his presence. Grease Monkey was near, no doubt about it. Her heart began to race faster as she got to where she was heading. She knew her way around the school vents just as much as Lucy did. She was a handyman and studied the schematics of the school, and knew every twist and lead end. She knew that Lincoln would soon find out that she was missing and panic, but there was something that she was going to have to deal once this was over. Right now she was more worried about getting rid of the spectator, haunted her fear and dreams. "I'm coming for you, Grease Monkey." Lincoln had finally got Lily to calm down. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Then Lincoln wondered why she began to cry, but figured that she was just scared. They all were. He lifted his arms and brought his sisters close. As long as his heart was still beating, he was not going to let anything happen to Lily, Lola, Lucy, or Lana. "Lana?" Lincoln said a bit too loudly. The kids hushed him, and he began to look around frantically, for his younger sisters were now looking around as well. "Lana?" Lola cried. "Shut the hell up," said a voice a little too loud, which caused some of the younger kids to gasp, and the others hushed them, which made the others hush the hushers. Lincoln didn't pay much attention to the voice, but his subconsciousness picked up as Chandler's voice. The older kid who was standing guards in front of the door of the outside banged on it. "Be quiet! You're all being too loud!" "Help!" Lincoln cried. The door swung open. "What is it?" the boy and the guard asked. From what Lincoln heard, the boy's name was Todd. "I can't find my sister." "What do you mean you can't find her? There's nowhere else she could have gone." "That's where you're wrong," a voice quiet said. Everyone turned to see Lucy standing by the vent, holding it open. Lincoln swore, which made the younger kids gasp again. He then turned to Clyde and handed Lily to him. "Here, hold Lily," he said to his friend, and then dove into the vent after Lana. "Lincoln!" Lola and Lucy cried. They dove in the vent after him. "Hey!" Todd went up to the vent, but Lincoln and his sisters were too far gone. He couldn't fit in the vent just to go after him. "What the heck is going on?" He turned to the kids and asked. There was no way Clyde was going to let Lincoln go after Lana alone. He had to distract the teen. "Someone must have gotten the tools and unscrewed the vent." Clyde pointed at the random direction of the room. "What tools?" the teen asked. He made his way to the corner of the room. Clyde then turned to Penelope and told her to watch Lily. Penelope was so dumbfounded that she took Lily without really thinking. Then Clyde hurried towards the vent and dove into it as well. "Hey!" Todd cried again, but Clyde was now gone too. Todd put a head to his forehead. "Damn, I suck at guarding kids." With his use of the F word, some gasps from the younger kids as well. Duke was sitting on his fake throne in the dimly lit auditorium. He was sweating and shaking like a frail leaf blowing in the wind. Why did he have to be such a coward? His cowardice have gotten so many people killed, even his own sister. He imagined the kids dying outside like she did, scared and alone, crying out for someone to help him. He couldn't be expected to save them all, but being as leader he claimed he was, he should have been doing something, not hiding all by himself in the safety of the school. But he was just too scared. Why did he have to be so scared? What would his parents say? What would his sister say? "It's okay, Duke. Everything is going to be okay." "Who said that?" Duke asked out loud. He looked around to see his family standing before him, all smiling. Duke began to tear up. "No, it's not," he said. "I'm too scared. My fear is getting everyone killed like it got you killed." He pointed at his sister Beth, who was just small and fragile, as she was when he last saw her. She stepped up and hugged him. "It's not too late," Duke's father told him. "You still have time to show everyone how brave you are." But I'm not brave. I'm scared," Duke told him. "I know, but you can't let your fear keep you from doing what's right. That's what bravery means. Doing something when you're scared." Duke then looked down at his sister, who was looking up at him, smiling. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you," he told her. I know you were, she told him, and I forgive you. Those words Duke gave the boost of confidence he needed. He suddenly felt braver than he ever had before. We love you too, son, his dad told him. They finally faded away before his very eyes. I love you too, Duke said. He picked up his spear and gripped the gun Joey had given him. Tightly as fast as he could, he ran out of the auditorium.